again, I'm very honored to introduce Jaclyn Whitt. Have you ever imagined which actor would play your main character in a movie version of your book? Of course you have. We all have. Today we have Jaclyn Whitt with us. She's a multi-award winning screenwriter and the education coordinator of Family Friendly Screenwriting Academy. And Jaclyn's here to give us insight into the world of screenwriting, how to get your book made into a movie. Jaclyn, take it away.
Thank you. All right. So I know that probably what I hear the most from authors is like, oh, I don't know how to write a screenplay, as if it's like the hardest thing in the world. And so I want to take a moment to let you know it's really not that complicated. And I'm going to show you a screenplay in a minute. But in high school, did you read any Shakespeare? Because Shakespeare was a play. So that's just a different format for how to tell a story. So if you manage to read Shakespeare, that's a script. It's not that complicated, right? And so if you can learn just kind of how to organize the words a little differently on the page, and then you can learn how to work within a few rules, then it's very simple. So I'm going to share what a screenplay looks like so that I can kind of ease that and get you to understand what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to move into more of some industry stuff. So let me just share this script here with you. This is one of my scripts. Okay, so let me just make this full screen. There, do you see like 2 pages side by side right now? Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is just like page 17 and page 18 from one of my screenplays. So this is like right in the thick of it. You can see here where it says Penny. That's just the person who's talking. Nothing's complicated about that. Underneath it is what she's saying. Nothing complicated about that, right? Like instead of having Penny said and then have quotes, we just do it this way. Very simple. And then down here, the stuff that's aligned left, these are action lines. So this is just whatever is not dialogue, we put it in the action line. Danita throws a pillow at Penny. That's what happens. Now you'll notice I don't get into a lot of detail. Okay, one of the things with a screenplay is we write very concisely. We just get to the point because we got to move on. We only have 2 hours at the max to tell a story. Okay, so this is where we got to keep things moving. And you'll notice that it's not really super poetic, right? Penny laughs and throws it back. It's kind of dry in a sense. It's very just objective what is happening. So I'm not getting into what anybody's thinking or feeling. I have to be able to explain that in a way that is what people say and do, because all of film it's expressed through or it's the storytelling is only through what is seen and heard. So in a book, you can get a lot of inside information, is what I call it, where you can understand someone's thought processes, you can understand what they're thinking, you can understand what they're feeling. They can have a thought memory just for a moment that then maybe they act out of that. But this is all we have to work with when we're writing a screenplay. Okay, we have to show what we hear and see, and that is it. So it does take a bit to learn how to do that. But then it's a lot of fun. So I'm actually just going to read a little bit of this for you over here on page 20. Okay, so that you can see how things move from one scene to the next scene. And I used to be an audiobook narrator, so I can do characters. We'll have fun with this. All right, so I'm going to just start at the top of page 20. A little bit of context. We have Penny and Danita are sisters that grew up in the foster care system. And there's this guy, Jackson, that Danita grew up playing music with. She's like a child prodigy. And so this is 11 years after they finish high school. She hasn't seen him since. She's going to be going back to her hometown to play at a friend's wedding. And so then her sister's teasing her, like, how are you going to play back in our hometown without Jackson there? Okay, so here we go. Penny, of course you were. It's just a friend's wedding. I've already written the song. You wrote the song? Yeah, it's just, I mean, it was a long time ago, but like, I don't know. I guess it could use a trumpet solo or something. I mean, it's kind of a bluesy, like the bridge sounds a little empty without it. I could hear it in my head when I play it. Right. Riley chases Max with water. Max squeals. By the way, that's her kids. Okay. What's Jackson up to these days? I don't know. Most of us haven't seen him since high school. Wasn't he at your reunion last year? No, he didn't show. For all I know, he's touring with some band somewhere, living his dreams, too busy for us little people. Okay, then we have interior bar night. Jackson sits at the bar, staring into space, swirling a drink in his cup. The twinkle in his eye is long gone. Okay, so now we've transitioned to the next scene. So the end of one scene is setting up the next scene. Now, you do this a lot when you're doing chapters, right? When you're writing a book, you're going to be completing something in a chapter, but at the same time, setting up the next chapter. And so it's the same thing with writing a screenplay. You just do it scene by scene. And if you're wondering, well, how many words is a screenplay? We don't count words. We count pages. And the reason we do that is because of the way it's formatted. Like you saw, there's a lot of white on that page. The way that it's formatted creates the average length of 1 minute per page. Okay, so 1 minute of screen time is the average length of what it takes to record one or film 1 page of a script. So if you want a 2-hour movie, it's going to be a 120-page script. Okay, and then you can go from there. If you're thinking, well, an hour and a half is good, then you want a 90-page script, right? And then you can work within that. So all you got to write, let's say 90 pages, that's quite often a good number, especially if it's not a drama. Dramas can go longer, but pretty much all of the other genres are going to be closer to 90 minutes. So that's just 90 pages. And there's barely anything on the page. So in one sense, you can be like, oh, it's not that much work. Although I have heard somebody say that it's harder to write shorter than longer. So you're going to have to work with your own brain on that, of how you feel about that. Personally, for me, I love that it's shorter, because when I try to write books, I am like exhausted by how many words it takes just to get my thoughts out, in a book form. I'm so used to doing short for film. But the thing is that there are actually rules that help you to format and process, not just the format of what it looks on the page, but how to create a structure. So in a book, you guys can let me know, in a book, is there a point where you call it the midpoint of the story? Like, do you actually have that moment? It's fine if you don't. Okay, so then this will be something that's different than writing a book. So in a movie, probably because of the fact that people are intended to watch it from start to finish in one sitting, it's an emotional journey that we take everybody on. And in the middle part of the movie, we call it the midpoint. Surprise. But it has a purpose. It's not just that it happens to come at the middle. The midpoint is where we actually kind of start the story all over again, but in a new way. So when you write a movie, and if you think about this, you might do this in your stories as well. You take your character, you have your setup, you start them on this journey, and then they get to a point where they kind of start to figure things out. And then something will happen that will cause everything to kind of slow down, refocus, remember what we're here for, and then they're back on their journey again. And if you watch a movie, you'll realize that happens every time. There's that moment in the middle where things kind of slow down for a second and then move on. And that's a moment where we really bond with our character. So I'm going to take a moment to talk about bonding with the character. If you're doing anything on film, you need to bond with your character first, as in the audience bonding with the character. Because if they don't care about the character, they're not going to care about watching it to the end. They need to be invested in that character. Maybe because they like them, maybe they find them entertaining, maybe they feel sorry for them. Whatever it is, there's something that is going to connect them with that character so that they'll follow them on that journey. All right, so that is some of the stuff you would need to know about writing a movie. But when you're coming to the point where it's like, okay, the industry, let's say I've written the script, what do I do with it? Okay, or maybe I just Maybe I don't want to write the script. Maybe I just want to sell the rights to my book to somebody else, to a producer so they can take it. So this is really important to understand. So if you take your book to a producer and you pitch it, okay, and they say, sure, yeah, I love it, I want to make that movie, I'm going to put a writer on it. It's important that you understand that means that you automatically are going to be sharing your writing credits with a screenwriter by at least half, maybe more. Okay, because that's how writing credits work in screenwriting. And I know a lot of authors are actually surprised that they would lose half of their writing credit just right up front, at least half. I'll keep saying that, it's at least half. But it's because that's the way that it works. And so if you're like, well, how much are we talking here then? What does that mean that I could be losing? Because we're talking about money too. It's not just about, your name on a screen. You're sharing the value of that writing credit. So if you're in America, you can go to the WGA to see what the American rates are. In Canada, you can go to the Canadian Writers Guild of Canada, I think is what it's called, WGC. And you'll see that basically the best way to imagine it is that the writing credit, the amount that writers get, is between 2 and 6% of the film's budget. Okay, so I'm going to talk about numbers for a minute here, so you might want to take notes. But between 2 and 5% of the film's budget. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, the film's budget is going to be dependent on a lot of things. Let's just talk about $1 million at this point, because that's a really easy number. So we'll go with that. Okay, so let's say if you have a $1 million budget, which, by the way, is actually considered a small budget for a movie. That is a low budget movie. Okay, so 3%, let's say, that's a pretty decent contract. If you can get 3% for the writers for $1 million, that's going to be $30,000. Well, sharing that with a screenwriter, you're already down to $15,000 or less. Okay, so if you want to learn how to write it yourself, and yeah, maybe it's going to take you a few months or whatever, are you willing to learn how to write a screenplay for a few months if it means that you're going to get $15,000? Maybe, but like I said, that's a small budget, because that's going to increase if you're going even higher. So how do you know which budget that your book would be? Okay, so here are the main 3 types of budgets. You've got your micro budget. Okay, these are the ones that independent filmmakers use. This goes straight to streaming. Okay, a micro budget is going to be around $300,000. Okay, that's not a lot of money to work with. So if your story has any emergency vehicles, children, maybe 1 or 2 is fine. But if you have like a classroom full of children, that's going to be hard to do on a micro budget, just because it costs more to have children in a film, because they have to have chaperones. Because that's the other thing. When you're writing a script, you have to pay attention to the budget. Okay, other things that would drive a budget up would be explosions, special effects, potentially the set, if it's like a big set. Okay, so you have to consider, would your story even work for a micro budget? Okay, that's one. Next, we've got the lower end of a low budget, which is $1 to $5 million. Now, with a $1 to $5 million budget, you can actually do a lot. A lot of made-for-TV movies are $1 to $5 million. And I'm speaking in US dollars, just so everybody understands that math. And so like a lot of Hallmark movies are a $1 million budget. Okay, made-for-TV movies. Now, keep in mind, a lot of Hallmark movies do not have the high budget items either, right? But they have quality production. Okay. And like I said, a lot of the made-for-TV movies are in that budget range, and also things that go to streaming. And there's a lot of streaming services. You definitely can make your money back by going straight to streaming. The days when we had independent movies that like made no money, that's gone. A lot of independent movies today make a lot of money. So it doesn't have to be sold to a studio to make anything off of it. All right, now the next one. It's still considered low budget, but it's the higher end of low budget. That's your 5 million to 20 million. Now, remember that 3% we talked about? 3% of 10 million? That's going to be 300,000. So now you're thinking, okay, am I going to share that with a writer? Because half of 300,000 is not 15,000 anymore, right? So the amount that you can make by learning how to write your own screenplay is huge. Now, if you were to hire a screenwriter to write it for you, they will probably charge around what they should charge beforehand, or they might work out like a payment plan where you pay them up to a certain amount, and then once the movie's sold, they get the rest of what they're due. So for example, if when people hire me to write a movie, if it's a micro budget, which also a micro budget is going to be shorter, because that's also how you would afford to make it get done. So if somebody hires me to do a micro budget, my minimum rate for that is $7,500 to write it. And it could be more than that, depending on how much of the story I have to develop. But if they come to me with a developed story and I just write the screenplay, then that's what I would charge. And that would mean it's going to be more like 1 hour to 1 hour and 20 minutes. It's not going to be an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's a shorter one. If somebody comes to me with either of the other larger budgets, the 1 million to 20 million or whatever, anywhere in there, I charge $10,000 as the actual charge for writing the screenplay as a minimum, because it's going to depend on how much I have to do. But then the rest of it is once it goes into production and the money gets paid out, then I'll get the rest of what I'm due. So I'm also willing to invest in the project moving forward. Now, you might be able to find writers that do that, like me. There are a lot of writers that they won't touch it unless they get paid the full amount upfront. So that's one of the things you're going to have to learn to navigate. And the reason is because there are a lot of scripts that get written, but not produced. But the reason why is actually not what people think. So some people might just think like, well, it just sits there and I can't find a producer. Well, you have to actually do that strategically. So I have a method for how I go about not just writing the screenplay, but coming up with a strategy, which is how to make your project attractive to a producer and finding the right producer. Hollywood, by the way, is kind of like the Wild West. Okay, it is kind of dangerous to navigate sometimes. You have to be careful that people don't just swindle you. There are a lot of times that a script gets purchased and buried. I'll give you a recent example of something that happened, like where a project got buried recently. Have you heard of there's a movie that came out recently called The Sound of Freedom? Okay, it's in theaters at the moment. So that movie actually was completely filmed and produced, everything ready to be released like 5 years ago. And Disney owned it, and they did not release it. They would not market it. They basically buried it. So once that was finished with, and maybe it was a contract that was up, because sometimes they have things for a certain time, or maybe the producers bought it back from Disney. I'm not exactly sure how that part played out. But once it was no longer in Disney's hands, the producers went through a different, like a crowdfunding site to get them to get people to submit to this, that when people put their money in, they actually were not donating, they were actually investing, because whatever money they put in, they were able to actually get some money back when it made money in the theaters. So they had to raise money in order to distribute it to theaters, because that's expensive. So by the way, talking about our budgets from earlier, the $5 million to $20 million range, if you want to go to theaters, you're going to have to do it in that range. So if you're thinking, I want my story to go to theaters, that means you're going to need an A-list actor, which automatically puts you in the $5 million plus range. Something to keep in mind. And maybe your story is totally worth that. Like maybe there's an A-list actor that is like, yes, that's what I want to do. That is my story. Okay, like, so I'm not trying to deter people, because these numbers, by the way, for people that are in like film production, these are normal numbers. These are not scary numbers. Okay, 5 to 20 million is thrown around all the time. Nobody bats an eye. The Sound of Freedom was filmed for $14 million. That was the budget for that movie. It has now made 13 times its budget. It was released at the beginning of July. So independent movies can make a lot of money. You've probably heard of the Barbie movie that came out. Okay, that movie, it's made, I think, over $300 million, but it had a $150 million budget. So it's only made like about 4 times its budget. And so when you're thinking from an investor's perspective, which one makes more sense, right? Like the ROI for independent movies is actually quite often quite high, because the independent filmmakers work with tighter budgets, leaving more room for the back end to make money on it. Okay. I'm going to stop for a second and see if there's any questions on anything I've said already. Okay. Is there anything that you're thinking like, I want to know more about this rather than that? Like, do you want to know more about the industry side or how to actually write a screenplay side?
I'm just a curious person and I'm enjoying the conversation.
Okay, great.
Sean has opened up chat here for anybody who wants to leave questions in there.
Okay.
Jaclyn, I want to know, where do you learn how to develop a story?
Okay.
I could put a lot of confusing stuff together on paper. I don't know if I could craft an easily followable story, with a proper arc and character development and all that. Where do you learn those kind of things?
Okay. Great question. I happen to teach those kinds of things. As you'll see, like I have I don't know if the website's there. Okay, I'll put my website in the chat. You can actually go to writemyscript.academy. Actually, maybe Sean, if you don't mind putting that in there, that'd be great. Writemyscript.academy. And you can download a free PDF to help you get started on this process. I do teach classes. I do one-to-one mentorship. I do also take projects and write them. So I do all of that. But I can give you a brief rundown of things to keep in mind. And a lot of it is going to relate. If you've written a narrative story, like for your book, if it's narrative, which I'll back up quickly in case you don't know. Narrative is where you're actually following a storyline. It's not like an instructional thing. Okay. And then a documentary, right? You've probably seen documentaries. That's where you're more focused on facts and people are telling the story. But a narrative is where the story is playing out. Okay. We're watching it unfold. And when you're writing a book, I've heard that there's a saying called show, don't tell. We have that saying for screenwriting as well, except that it's on a whole nother level, right? We don't want the characters telling the story. We want to show the story to the audience. So if the character is saying, remember that time when we first met? Oh, it was such a disaster. We don't want the character saying that. We want there to be a flashback showing the disaster. Right? We want to be able to actually understand that thing. We don't want somebody to walk into the room and say, oh, hi, brother. How are you today? Like, why would we say hi, brother? Nobody talks like that. There would have to be a reason or something would have to happen in order for that information to be revealed in a more authentic way. So we show, don't tell. So that's, again, part of that writing from more of an objective perspective rather than inside information, because inside information can say his brother walked into the room and we don't think anything of that. We're just like, okay, yeah, his brother walked into the room. Like, we're showing the story. We're seeing his brother walk into the room. Well, in a movie, how are you supposed to say to the audience that that's a brother unless somebody says, oh, hello, brother? There's going to be another way. And that's one of the things that you learn how to do. Okay, character and structure of a story. This is one of the things that I love. And the reason why I love it is because I was horrible at it when I first started writing. When I started working with a mentor, I took my screenplay to him and he looked at it and he's like, oh yeah, no, it's pretty good. Let me take a look. I'm going to read through, because he looked at like a scene and he could see I had written it properly with the right formatting. But he said, okay, let me read through it and then we can get together and I'll give you some notes. I was like, great, awesome. So I went back like the next week and, I sat down. I'm ready to hear all of the wonderful things he has to say about it. And he sighed heavily and said, don't show this to anyone. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, is that good? He's like, do not ever show this to anyone, because it would just damage me forever. So he said, here's the thing. You have really interesting characters and you've written really, really nice scenes. They're very clever. They're interesting, funny, quirky. I love it. I have no idea where your story's going. What genre is this? Like, he didn't even know what genre it was. And then I realized I didn't even know what genre it was. I was just writing, and, like whatever mood I was in was kind of what was steering things. And so I love dialogue and I love creating characters, especially quirky ones, because they're fun. But I had no idea how to actually develop the structure of a story. So that's what I had to learn. And now that I've learned it, I'm so excited to share it with other people. So like I said, at the very beginning, very first priority, you got to connect the audience with your main character.
Hi, everybody.
Even if this is a documentary, even if this is on YouTube, whatever it is, in order for the audience to continue, they have to care about the main character, which is going to be the first one introduced. Very rarely are you introduced to other characters before you're introduced to the main character. That's just part of setting things up. Okay. And if you think about it, like when you're watching something, especially it's something new, you know nothing about this movie. If you didn't see any trailers about it and you just sat down and watched a movie because someone said it's a good movie, you're just taking information in, holding it, thinking, okay, this is going to mean something in a minute. Eventually I'm going to understand why I'm following this scenario with this person. If it goes nowhere, then they're just holding that information. Like, how much information can they just like build up and hold before it actually fits into a context? So that's why we need to connect them with the main character right away, so that now we've got them in. Next thing we have to do is help the audience understand who they are right now, which includes their flaw. Now, this is what the whole story revolves around, their flaw. This is the same thing Shiraz does. We need to find where is that issue. So we need to be able to present it in a way that the audience is going to start to clue in that this is what this character's story and journey is all about. And then something happens. Okay, first we need to understand at the point when we meet our character, their flaw is still kind of working for them. They're managing through life, is still working for them. Something happens, which we call the inciting incident or the catalyst. There's a few different names for it. That something that happens is something different, which is going to actually start to poke holes in their life because of their flaw. They're going to have to go on a journey where their flaw no longer works for them, and they have to learn to do it differently. Okay, back up for a second. Your story will either be something where your character learns and overcomes their flaw, or they will not learn and they will go deeper into their flaw. Because if you think about it, when you're the writer, you are basically the god of the universe. So you are presenting your character with an opportunity to focus on a flaw and to grow. And my job as the god of that universe is to create so many opportunities, one after another, for my character to grow. So I'm throwing obstacles in the way because that's how people grow. People don't grow because things are working. People grow because things aren't working, right? So that's how the character is going to grow. And then that's how we also get tension and struggle, that's what the whole movie's about. Okay. So if you decide that your character is going to overcome their flaw, then that means you will put those obstacles in there. And we have 3 acts. I don't know how it works in stories for books, but in movies and plays, there are acts, which is just a section of the story. Okay. So act 1 is like the first quarter. Act 3 is the last quarter. So beginning, end. Everything in the middle is act 2, right? The middle. That's where the story happens. So as soon as we've introduced the character, something's happened in their life where they go on a journey. Now they're on a journey. This is what the story's all about, act 2. So the first half of act 2, they're going to fumble their way through it because their flaw will no longer work for them, and they're going to have to figure out, what do I do instead? And people will show up to show them the way. This is one thing I've actually learned that has benefited me in my life. When I am struggling and I can't figure out why, there are people that just inevitably show up and help me figure it out, and I realize I need to learn something new. This is what happens in movies. Now, remember I mentioned about the midpoint. Everything kind of revolves around this moment, because up until there, the character realizes, okay, yeah, this flaw isn't working for me. I've learned some new skills, but they've learned it in an environment that's not really fully a life environment. It's just something, right? They've had an opportunity to learn it. At the midpoint, something happens which draws out a more vulnerable part of their life. Usually it's going to be connected to their wound, whatever it was that caused the flaw in the first place. And they have an opportunity to now address that. And they kind of go through the same situation as the first half, where now they have to figure out, how do I overcome this in a different, more real life, more vulnerable situation? And so then what happens there is either they learn to overcome it or they don't, right? This is where they're going to make that decision. But they do all have to get all the way to the point where they feel like it is all lost, because the obstacles come so fast and so hard. Whoever that adversary or the villain, the bad guy, whoever it is that's against them and putting a lot of these obstacles in their path, they like pull out all the stops. And they play their trump card that they have been hiding in their back pocket. And they hit that main character so hard, they fall on their face and they're ready to give up and just go back to who they were before, not even try anymore to be different, not try to get ahead. They've been hit hard. However, they're not the same. They're not who they were before. They've been through too much. They can't go back. There's got to be a way. So for those that are ready, like what Shiraz says, when they're ready, they come up with a solution. Now, the solution is going to point back to a lot of the stuff that they had learned, and quite often point back to the people that helped them to learn in the first part of Act 2. Okay, they're going to recall those lessons. They're going to be transferable skills. They're going to press into that, and that's how they get to the climax. And the climax is where they overcome the adversary with their newfound strength. They don't just overcome somebody for no reason. Like, let's say if it's a sports movie, they don't just win the game. Like the main character, the quarterback, whatever you want to call him, he doesn't just lead his team into victory because he happened to lead them into victory. It's because he overcame that flaw that gave him a new insight and understanding, passion, whatever was needed in order for him to actually make that breakthrough. And then after that, we see the rest of whatever stories came up, tie up any loose ends or whatever. But that's how a movie is written. And it's an emotional roller coaster. Sometimes the main character and the audience are feeling completely different emotions. Like, how many times have you been watching a movie where the main character is failing, falling flat on their face, they're having a horrible time, and we are laughing our butts off? Okay, we're not feeling the same emotion. But after the midpoint, our emotions will get closer and closer and closer because we're invested in that character right? That setup at the beginning, we're willing to watch them fall on their face for the first little while because we saw it coming. We knew they had a flaw and they were stubborn. We're okay with watching them fall on their face. But when we know, because we've seen them grow enough that we know they're capable, then we start rooting for them, and the audience, our emotions are going to start to line up with the character. And that's why it can be so inspiring, which is why having a film is such an inspiring way of experiencing a story, because you go through all of the emotions and you live vicariously through that character as it's playing out on the screen. Have you read Joanna Trollope? She has amazing character development. I have not. That's an interesting, okay, thank you for that. Yeah. Anyways, I've lost my train of thought, but that's okay. I've said a lot of things. Any questions? We're coming toward the end here. All right. Yeah, Shiraz, it's interesting when I listen to you talk, and I'm just like relating so much of it to character development. And it's interesting because one of the things about film is that it relates so closely to life, because we can only experience it the same way that we experience real life. We experience by what we see and hear, and that's it. I have no idea what other people are thinking unless they actually tell me, right? I can make guesses, but I can't know things. So when we watch a movie, we learn how to discern. We learn how to judge, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but just like in a discernment, that we're able to understand, like, okay, that behavior means this.
Yeah. So I think the reason you relate to me is the subtitle of my book is called Becoming the Author of the Stories in Your Life. And some of the chapter titles are your backstory, your genre, your archetype, your supporting characters, driving the narrative. So,
yeah.
And yeah, it's funny because hearing you talk, it's like things are clicking, and it's one thing that just it's good, but it also annoys me a bit, is that knowing this formula, I watch movies and things are going into a flow. And I'm like, oh, this is the part where it's all going to go to crap, because that's just what happens, that's the formula, right? So
yeah.
So I get this little bit of anxiety as everyone else in the movie is celebrating just before they all go into anxiety. But,
yeah.
But the formula works. I mean, every major motion picture is based on it.
Yeah. And the reason why it has to go into crisis is because it's all about the character arc. Mm-hmm. Because it's only when people are willing to submit to change that they can grow. And a lot of the time, at least in the stories, because I mean, think about the stories that people actually are going to put money into making, they're going to be the hard lessons, right? Those are the inspirational ones, when people have really had to struggle to get that. They earn it, right? That's why it has to go to that extent, because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm kind of done with being greedy. I just don't want to be greedy anymore. I'm going to be generous. Yeah, I think I'm just going to be generous. No, there's got to be some reason why, right? Something has to happen for somebody to actually change a character flaw. Because, as you probably also realize, their character flaw came out of a wound. And that's why the wound also has to be addressed. Now, there's going to be more and less of that kind of thing, depending on what genre it is and what the story's about. But there is going to be, if you actually break it down and can assess it, you can draw out like, okay, so that flaw, yeah, I can recognize that flaw. And there was a wound that caused that. And when they healed the wound and overcame the flaw, then their life changed and they became more than what they could have been before. And that's why after the climax, we get to see them in their new world, in their new life, where they're actually walking out this new way of being. And, like when you were talking about how with the addiction, right? Like you've made some breakthrough, but in order to keep that, you have to keep doing the work. That's kind of the process of the way it works for developing character in a movie, because there are so many times where they start that change and then they fall back into old patterns, and then they start that change again and they fall back. And each time they're going a little bit further forward toward, that strength, but they keep falling back until they get to that one time, which is the crisis moment, but they get to that point where it's like, either I learn this now or I never will.
Yep.
I think that relates to life.
So I have a question for you, Jaclyn. Given all that you've shared with us, do you have a favorite story or screenplay? I mean, is there one that you saw and you just went, wow, they nailed that so perfectly? Is there one that stands out to you as a particularly good example of hitting all the right notes?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. Basically, I would just encourage you to go find the script that's like your favorite movie or TV show pilot or something like that. You can easily find the PDF online. Just put the title, script, PDF, you'll find it. They're free. And so one of the ones that I thought was written so well, which it would not surprise me if this writer was an author, because I have found authors are some of the best screenwriters. But it's the pilot for Person of Interest. It's a TV show. And actually the pilot was so engaging to read, because sometimes scripts, as you saw before, they can kind of be dry or whatever. This guy, when he was writing his action lines, he wrote it like it was really interesting to read, not just watch as a TV show. But just to kind of give you a few examples of like how iconic the movies that were made from books, like maybe some people could even put some in the chat to share, but obviously, I mean, I'm not a Harry Potter fan, but that a lot of people are. That's one. There's what's the one with Princess Bride, one of my favorite movies. Same guy wrote the book, wrote the movie. He made all the money on that one. Good for him. There's also Hunger Games, like, and just so you know, it is about just shy of 28% of movies that are made from books. They're the adaptation from books. That means more than 1 in 4 movies that's made is a book adaptation. And just so you know, if you have a book, especially if it's selling and especially if you have a following, if you take the screenplay adaptation of that to a producer to pitch that, they are going to look at that like it's going to go to the top of the pile just for the fact that you already have an audience for it. That's huge.
So what constitutes an audience?
Okay. Well, you mean like number of followers or anything?
Yeah, like, because I mean, if 5,000, would they look at it, or has it have to be 50,000 or?
No, well, I mean, obviously the more you have, the more interesting it's going to be and the more compelling it'll be for them. But even at a lower amount, the fact that you have a book, because you could actually, like, they could tell you, like, you go on a campaign with this book while we work on the movie, they know that there's already going to be marketing happening and stuff like that, because you can go on podcasts and stuff and work on building the book and then say, hey, we've got a movie coming out too. But just the fact that there's more than one product to be working toward gathering the audience, that's very helpful. I was going to say something. Sometimes my brain goes too fast and then it's like, whoop, gone. Okay, so if you already have the book and people are buying it, regardless of how many people have bought it, the fact is there are people saying, we like this story, we like this author, there's an audience. So the more that you can continue to grow that, and that's one of the strategies that we work on. So as you continue to grow your audience for your book and your followers, your emailing list, all of that stuff is adding to what a producer is looking at to make it more attractive. Now, on top of that, you can also win awards. If your book wins awards, that's great. If the screenplay wins awards, that's great. You know, so if you take awards, an audience, and a book to a producer, they're going to look at that pretty much right away because they don't want to miss out on that, especially if you take it to the right producer. If you take it to a producer that has the same audience as what your book is going toward, then they're going to want to look at that because they're serving a specific audience. If you take it to just all the producers that are out there, they won't care. You'll waste your time. Yes.
Jaclyn, our room is about to close. We're at the end of your presentation. Can we show her some appreciation, everybody?
Thank you.